Join me Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play a very special edition of live NFL Draft Trivia, where you get to test your knowledge about everything and anything related to the draft for a chance to win cash prizes. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. For the last 25 years, one bowl game has captivated the college football nation. That's right, I'm of course talking about the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. Everything about this bowl game seems kind of bizarre, from the incredibly weird but incredibly cute potato mascot, to the fact that they don't even bother changing the field and swap out Boise State's logo or end zones, to the signature blue field of the stadium, to just the fact that it's an outdoor bowl game in Idaho, making it one of just 3 bowl games, alongside the Pinstripe Bowl and the Fenway Bowl, to be held outdoors in a traditionally cold weather city. And of all the installments of this bowl game, perhaps none were as big as the 2005 edition between Boston College and Boise State. In one corner, you had a ranked team in a power conference. In the other corner, you had a team playing on their home field. This game should have been incredible, and with over 30,000 people in attendance, this was looking like it could legitimately be the biggest version of this game ever. Instead, it was an absolute disaster, and was highly controversial. I'm not talking about on the field, because the game itself was incredible. Rather, I'm talking about off the field with how Boston College was treated. Because in what was supposed to be a neutral game, even though it was being played in front of Boise's home crowd and on Boise's home field, Boston College was treated like the visitors. In fact, they were treated so poorly that there was outrage surrounding their treatment, and the bowl organizers had to issue an apology for how they treated the Eagles. This is the story behind the most controversial Potato Bowl, or MPC Computers Bowl as it was known back then, ever played. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand the two teams playing, and just how significant this game was. In one corner, you had Boston College out of the ACC. Expectations were pretty high for Boston College coming off of a great 2004 season, where they won the Big East and went 9-3, which was tied for their highest winning percentage since the 1984 season, when they went 10-2. As a side note, to learn more about that 1984 Boston College team, click the card in the upper right corner. The 2005 season was the first time that Boston College was playing in the ACC, and they did fairly well, as once again, they were 8-3 through 11 weeks, and spent all but 2 weeks of the season ranked inside the top 25. They went 8-1 against unranked opponents, always seemed to take care of business when they had to, and considering the fact that they entered the bowl season ranked number 19, if they won their bowl game, they would have finished the season with their highest ranking in the AP poll since all the way back in 1993. And in the other corner, you had Boise State out of the WAC. After a somewhat shaky start to the season, where they started off 0-2, the Broncos established themselves as one of the top teams in the conference, as they won 9 of their next 10 games to finish the regular season with a record of 9-3. For the 4th straight season, they won the WAC, although this time they only won a share of the conference title, as they split it with Fresno State. And they did this thanks to an insane offense that averaged 36.1 points per game, which was the 9th highest total in all of Division 1A. For their efforts, the Broncos were once again going bowling, and were going to have the opportunity to play in front of their home crowd, just like they did 3 times before this bowl game back when it was the Humanitarian Bowl in 1999, 2000, and 2002. Perhaps no non-BCS game had more storylines entering it than this game right here. This was legitimately one of the most anticipated bowl games on the entire calendar. Boston College had the nation's longest active streak of bowl wins, having won 5 straight, winning the 2000 Aloha Bowl, the 2001 Music City Bowl, the 2002 Motor City Bowl, the 2003 San Francisco Bowl, and the 2004 Continental Tire Bowl. And Boise State had an insane 31-game winning streak at home. Playing on their blue field was like a cheat code, and was the world's greatest home field advantage. The last time they lost on their home field was September 8, 2001, when they lost 41-20 to Washington State. That was 3 days before 9/11. If Boise State won this game, this meant that their senior class would be sent off without ever having lost a game at home. And on top of that, this was the final game that head coach Dan Hawkins would ever coach for the Broncos, as he announced at the end of the regular season that after this bowl game, he was leaving to become the head coach at Colorado. The storylines were plentiful for all the right reasons. And then, they had to become plentiful for all the wrong reasons. Because when Boston College arrived in Boise, they were treated in a manner that can only be described as shameful. Before I go any further, I have to note that obviously, Boston College knew going into this game that this was going to be a de facto home game for Boise State. they were going to draw the larger crowd, especially since they doubt that Boston College has a strong alumni base in Idaho. They were going to have to play on the blue turf, which they were not used to, and were going to have to play on a field with Boise State's logos and wording on it, as was tradition at this bowl game. Head coach Tom O'Brien was not oblivious to this. He even somewhat embraced the challenge, saying, "It's a home game for them. We just have to deal with it. And maybe we're better equipped to handle it than most teams in the ACC." But anytime there is a bowl game taking place at a college team's home stadium, and that home team is involved, even though certain elements of the game might feel like it's a home game, it is supposed to be neutral, where neither team receives preferential treatment in terms of the festivities and the activities surrounding the game. But in 2005 at the MPC Computers Bowl, holy cow, that was completely thrown out the window, because the bowl organizers, for some reason, decided to do everything in their power to disrespect the Eagles and to make this trip as unpleasant for them as possible. Let me introduce you to the banquet that went horribly wrong. For starters, there was a banquet held for both teams a few days before the game, as was tradition. For Boise State, they could bring anyone they wanted to. The more the merrier. For Boston College, however, only certain guests were invited to attend, as they had to keep their guest list as tiny as possible. Again, this is supposed to be a neutral bowl game, but restricting Boston College's guest list while allowing Boise State to bring anyone and everyone they wanted to seemed ridiculously unfair. And it didn't help matters much that literally every single speaker that was invited to speak at this banquet ended their speeches by saying, "Go Broncos." One of the speakers even went as far as taking time during their speech to call out the arrogant Boston media, which again, seems like the furthest thing from neutrality. As linebacker Ray Henderson said on the banquet and the behavior of everyone involved, it started to get a little obnoxious. But okay, sure there was an issue with the guest list, and sure, the speakers didn't do a great job hiding their biases for wanting the Broncos to win by throwing in some jabs, with some more playful than others. But one speaker crossed such a line that he made everyone furious, and made people on Boston College leave the room in the middle of the event. The man you're watching right now is defensive lineman Mathias Kiwanuka, and you could make a legitimate argument that he is the greatest defensive player in the history of the program. He was the first defensive end in school history to ever be named a Walter Camp All-American, when he received this honor in 2004 on the second team. He was named a first-team All-ACC selection in 2005, and was a first-team All-Big East selection in 2003 and 2004. He was named the Big East Defensive Player of the Year, becoming the only player in school history to ever receive this award. He was named a captain in 2004 and 2005, becoming one of just a handful of players in school history to ever be named a captain twice. In 2004, he had 25.5 tackles for a loss, setting the single-season school record for most tackles for a loss, which is a record that still holds up today. He had 3.5 sacks in a 2005 game against NC State, which at the time of the game was the school record for most sacks in a game. He had 11.5 sacks in 2003 and 11.5 sacks in 2004, being the only player in school history to ever have 2 seasons with more than 10 sacks. And his 69.5 tackles for a loss over his career and his 37.5 sacks over his career are both school records by a fairly comfortable margin, even today. To make a long story short, Kiwanuka was an absolute stud, and was one of the most instrumental and influential defenders in school history. So the banquet organizers had a genius idea. Let's specifically target Kiwanuka and take shots at him during the speeches. What could possibly go wrong? Because during the banquet, Mike Atkins, the chairman of MPC Computers, thought that it was smart and in good taste to intentionally mispronounce Kiwanuka's name and play it off for comedic effect. Atkins read off a list of the top 10 things that Boise and Boston have in common, and one of those things was no one in either city can properly pronounce Mathias Kiwanuka, with Atkins intentionally mispronouncing the name as part of the punchline. And combined with everything else that had taken place, at that point, Boston College was furious, and understandably so, especially when you consider the fact that Kiwanuka's last name comes from his grandfather, who was the first prime minister of Uganda and was kidnapped, tortured, and assassinated. The joke was culturally insensitive, and a line was crossed to the point where Kiwanuka got up and left the banquet before taking to the press to lash out at Atkins, the mayor of Boise, for being biased, and the banquet organizers. As Kiwanuka said, "As far as Mike Atkins goes, he took my name and used it as a punchline. I felt he purposely mispronounced my name and then went off to crack a joke on my family name, which is something I hold very dear to me. There was no laughing it off. I was pretty livid about it at the time, removed myself from the situation, and left the banquet. Other players echoed similar thoughts, with safety Ryan Jasper saying, Kiwanuka is a great leader and a role model. When you offend our leader and role model, you basically targeted our family. And this banquet was such a disaster that afterwards, just about everyone involved issued apologies, probably in an effort to save face to try and make sure that other teams would want to accept the invitation in the future. Alyssa Reed, the director of public relations for MPC Computers, said on the incident, "We were very happy to have Boston College here. We apologize for any misunderstanding." How are you a PR director and don't know that saying sorry for the misunderstanding, essentially saying that it was not your fault and that your actions weren't harmful, is the worst apology ever? And yeah, you were so happy to have Boston College there that you limited their guest list at the banquet and had every speaker end their speech with "Go Broncos." Gary Beck, the executive director for the bowl, promised to implement policies and procedures for future bowl games to prevent anything like this from happening again, and said, "The MPC Computers Bowl, whose roots are based on a humanitarian model of service, would never attempt to discredit, humiliate, or offend anyone. We again apologize to Mr. Kiwanuka for any discomfort or embarrassment the speech at the event caused him or his family. It was certainly unintentional and without any malice. But the damage was done at this point. The 2005 MPC Computers Bowl, which was supposed to be one of the best bowl games of the season, was an unmitigated disaster." But this incident turned out to be some incredible motivation for the Eagles, because when all was said and done, Boise's 31-game winning streak on their home field was about to be destroyed. The sad part about this entire incident is that it took away from what was an absolutely fantastic game, and might have been the best non-BCS bowl of the entire 2005 season. I can't go as far as saying it was the best bowl game period of the entire 2005 season because, there was this Rose Bowl between Texas and USC that you might have heard about, but this was a fantastic game. Boston College jumped out to a 27-0 lead, but Boise State came storming back, literally, as it was in the middle of a hailstorm, and they got it to 27-21 with 4 minutes left in the ballgame. Then the Broncos drove all the way down to the red zone and had a goal-to-go situation, but Boston College held on after an interception in the end zone ended the game. It was an absolutely insane contest, and featured one of the greatest almost comebacks in the history of bowl season. But after the game, all the talk was about the banquet, and head coach Tom O'Brien said that the horrible remarks made at the banquet by just about everyone were the perfect motivation for his team. As he said, "We go to a banquet that turns into a pep rally. I didn't have to say anything to this team. I ought to thank the mayor and the people of Boise for getting this team ready to play. There wasn't anything I had to do to get this team ready." And Kiwanuka echoed those thoughts, saying, "As far as motivation goes, if we didn't have it before 2 days ago, we definitely found it." I think that had a lot to do with why we came out so strong. Just like that, Boston College won their 6th straight bowl game, extending the nation's longest active winning streak, and ended their season on an incredibly high note. As for what happened after the game, MPC Computers was no longer the title sponsor after the 2006 season, and it's not too hard to see why. When you combine the troubles that the company was having, how stupid their executive was if this banquet was anything to go off of, and the disaster that this game posed. At least to my knowledge, there haven't been any problems with Famous Idaho Potato in the decade that they've sponsored the game. So good for them. But perhaps most interestingly is not only has Boston College never come back to this bowl game, which isn't too surprising, but neither has Boise State. Even though Boise State has always been in the conference that is affiliated with the bowl, ever since this incident, they haven't made another appearance in the bowl game. Now, this could be a complete coincidence. This could be the fact that Boise doesn't want to play in the game, or the fact that Boise's prestige has gone up considerably since their last appearance. However, considering what Gary Beck said about implementing policies and procedures after this game, maybe this is what he had in mind. Maybe this is intentional. The best way to prevent bias and to prevent the mayor and speakers from being insensitive is to just not have Boise State play in the game, and to just have 2 completely unaffiliated teams. Still, this bowl game taught some important lessons that really shouldn't need to be explained, but apparently, back in 2005, they did. If you're going to be, for all intents and purposes, a neutral bowl game, then treat both teams equally. Don't give one team preferential treatment over the other, and don't turn a banquet into a pep rally for one of the teams, making everyone uncomfortable. And if you want to tell jokes at the banquet to lighten the mood and to get laughs, fine, go right ahead. But maybe don't bring up a player's assassinated grandfather into the mix, as it's probably going to be over the line. The 2005 MPC Computers Bowl was a fantastic game on the field. But off the field, during the banquet, someone should have stepped in during it and performed the Control-Alt-Delete function. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.